Okay, so just for the record,
Okay.
this is January 4th, 2010. This is Jerry Allen interviewing Sheila de Bretteville in Sheila's studio and home in New Haven, Connecticut.
The work I did at CalArts stands in a particular special place when I think of my life and working, because it was a time where the people who were planning the school were so busy planning the school that they pretty much let me do what I wanted. And that kind of freedom is really very delicious, as you well know. All artists know it, but not all designers know it. Designers are often given the content and really only make the form in relationship to that content and to accentuate and augment or highlight or enhance the content. But to choose the content yourself and to choose everything else about it, the first time I ever did that was thanks to CalArts, so I have to start there.
What were you hired to do at CalArts?
I was hired to do the publicity for the school, all the graphic expression of the school. And of course it comes very much off of the late 60s values. What I was looking for was ways in which the graphic design or anything that I made functioned the way a street performs, that you meet people who you might not otherwise have come in contact with and have to make some kind of negotiation with them. It's not always necessarily by choice. And I was really interested in that kind of tension and that kind of interaction. And also, I was young. I was in my late 20s, and everything felt like was at the beginning in some way, just because Los Angeles was so foreign. I mean, Milan is much more like New York than New York is like Los Angeles. So Los Angeles really was foreign territory as far as I'm concerned. All the palm trees, all that sunshine, I wasn't sure how I felt about it all. But I really like the freedom of beginnings. There's something about beginnings that are just what I feel that way now at 69, that I'm, to be honest, more interested in what I'm going to do tomorrow than what I did yesterday. Judy Chicago was offered a special issue of Every Woman on the work that she was doing in Fresno, and Mimi Shapiro, who had come with Paul Brock, who was a dean at CalArts, asked me if I would do this issue, and I went up to find out what Judy was doing there. And what I organized this in a format that for me was equal to consciousness raising, because in conscious raising every woman gets the same amount of time to speak to a particular subject, and she could even be silent if she wasn't ready to speak, at least in my conscious raising group. And in this case I gave every woman an equal spread. Each woman got a picture of herself and a piece of her work in it in the journal. And this is Suzanne Lacey, who applied to CalArts and came and was my teaching assistant when I did the Women's Design Program. The building of the studio, all the things that Judy did with the students. And of course, as a center spread, when they went to meet T.D. Grace Atkinson, they did a cheerleading welcome. And of course, of all the images, of course, this is the one that gets shown a lot because everybody likes the fact that I did something so outrageous as have C-U-N-T. And in fact, this spread is really interesting to me because it's the kind of va-va-va-voom that I don't tend to do in my work. But Judy, in that moment, and the students were in a va-va-va-voom spirit, and so the center spread. How could I resist not making the center spread be this cheer? Here's Faith Wilding talking about the women that influenced her. These things, this means more to me than the cheerleadings. Even though it was a special issue, it has a special place in my thinking because of that representation of the conscious raising equality. There were two parallel programs, the Feminist Art Program that Judy Chicago and Mimi Shapiro did, and the Women's Design Program, which I did with Suzanne Lacey as my TA. And actually it wasn't easy. I went to Victor Papanek, who was a dean, and said I was the only woman on the faculty, that I wanted my 2 days at CalArts to be 2 days for women only. And he was very resistant. And I just kept at him because I'm fairly persistent. And finally he said, well, if you do that, then none of the boys will have you as a teacher. I said, just hire more women. I'm not the only woman in Los Angeles for you to hire. This is what I would like to do. So anyway, I got to do it. So it's not like we didn't get to do it, but the getting to do it involved constantly feeling like it was not considered at the center of anyone's education. It wasn't important. It was against what they really would have you do. We didn't need all that extra stuff. And we just felt that we could just work together to do something that was all our own. We would learn more. Because actually, I think both the programs were investigatory. They were a way of exploring things that we didn't know about at the same time as we were teaching something we knew about. It wasn't just the transfer of knowledge from the teacher to the student. It was about the teachers and the students doing something together that both were learning from. We decided that we could do better if we were not connected to CalArts, so we sent out this brochure in '72, and 35 women applied, and they came. Having a building of our own allowed us to do what we wanted to do, with, so that the initial moments of it were all ours. Were ours to define, ours to house. And luckily, I negotiated the lease for the Grandview building, and the Grandview building was in many ways more welcoming, partially because it was on a city street. It was across the street from MacArthur Park. People could just walk by and wonder what it was and come in. That building didn't require that much work because it had been occupied just up until the point we came, unlike the second building. So we just moved in the fall. And actually, there's a poster of us all running toward the building that Maria Carras took, that I arranged for, to symbolize women just flooding the building. Running to the building, and I put in the spandrels of that building all the different organizations that came together. But in fact, it was the Feminist Art Workshop that organized all of that. There were just a lot of really phenomenal artists and really wonderful women who were meeting during that time, looking for ways to become more visible, to not feel like the guys get all the shows and no women get any shows, and what can we do about that? And out of that, you can see the fervor that existed in Los Angeles was extremely buoying. Yes, there's a certain amount of individual freedom, but you don't really realize the time. The spirits of that time was incredibly liberating. It wasn't the invention of anyone. It isn't our invention. It really was a lot of women all over the world, not just in Los Angeles either, in New York, in London, who were beginning to see that how much gender was defining their possibilities, and looking at it different ways to understand not only the history of how gender affected how our place in society was being shaped, but what we wanted to do about it. And we didn't have assumptions about what we wanted to do about it, which is what I liked most about both the Women's Design Program and the Feminist Art Workshop, that it was as much about asking questions. It really wasn't about having all the answers. There were many different ways of parsing how we could understand being women. When Judith Butler came out with Gender Trouble, that was it. That was like the quintessential book of the year, because she just questioned the word itself and its category that it designated. And it just was a really incredibly fecund time. It still is when you think about what it was that we were calling into question. And then, of course, the wonderful Kristen Grimstead and Susan Rennie came to the Spring Street building, and they had done the Women's Whole Earth Catalog, and we formed Chrysalis magazine. And Arlene and I and Ruth Iskin and Debbie Marrow and Kirsten and Susan were the editors, and I was the designer, and I designed this poster, which was about this blending of women and women's speech, women's way of talking, that kind of conversational thing that happens with women where you don't know where it's going to go, because you say something and she says something, and then you say something else and it goes somewhere you didn't expect. And this is just a little flyer, but it was the continuing education program that we ran at the Women's Building the spring of the first year. And what was extraordinary about it is that there were lectures being given here on Virginia Woolf, because there weren't women's studies classes yet. So in fact, the Women's Building ran a women's studies program before there was a women's studies program anywhere. The amount of time that went into administering the building, making it work, keeping the women inspired to be there in their own behalf, because it was so economically threatened all the time. And you know, people would say the building should do X or Y, and I'd say, hey, we are the building. There isn't anyone else. This is it. If you want it done, it's one of us have to do it, or it's not going to happen. And I think that notion that someone should do something, we are that someone, was a very important and difficult thing to acknowledge. And it was a true struggle, especially at Spring Street, because we just simply didn't have the money to sustain it. At the second women's building at Spring Street had a show on incest survivors. I began to work in redesigning the LA Times at the time, so I was at the LA Times, and one of the women whose name, unfortunately, I don't remember, told me that she was able to write about incest in the LA Times because we had had the show. If we had not had the show, then she wouldn't have had an event that would be something she could cover, and then through covering it, be able to really talk in public about incest. And I think many of the women at the building were understandably mostly thinking about their experience and what it had meant to them and how they had gotten through it, and hadn't really thought about the public, how the public might see it. Who is that public anyway? And then we had this exhibition, and I think there were many people still at the building at Spring Street who really questioned the public aspect of the building. And given where we were on Spring Street at that time, getting anybody to come there was really an effort, a full-time effort. Doing that meant that someone could actually cover it in the LA Times, and that matters to me. I mean, it was something I didn't know. I just happened to have, actually in the ladies' room, the woman told me this, and I was really delighted to know that the coverage of things is one of the ways in which, it's not that we don't know this. Certainly Take Back the Night played on using the media to talk about things that the media would not be talking about unless you made a big event that they had to cover. But I don't think people thought about tender things and things that are so personal as incest, and experiences that are the ones that you have to really work through to be all that you want to be. That those things too need to have a public expression of some sort that would allow more people to begin to find themselves in your experience. One of the things that I did at the building that really interested me a great deal was this class called Private Conversations, Public Announcements. And again, it's another kind of way of making blending together public and private. So I asked women to make a map of the city and locate the places where they felt uncomfortable, and then choose of those places one place for which they would design a poster, and then negotiate to put that poster up in that place. And the students in the program did it, and they did things that I really loved, I have to say. And maybe it's because they, you know, in some ways it's not so much the poster, it's that they did it in the process and the support system that we created around it. And then Rita Wright did it at the place in Pasadena, which is pretty much a dividing line, Lake Street, between the African-American part of Pasadena and the white and more moneyed part of Pasadena. And Teeny Boink did it about the whole issue of marriage and wedding gowns at a place that sold wedding gowns, and the quality of lace, because she's attracted to the lace, but not necessarily to the idea and the institution of marriage. And Anna Tartolini did something about graffiti and how she felt violated but also attracted to the graffiti. And Ellen Lee did this wonderful thing of using the character for a woman in Chinese characters, Hanzi, so that the word woman had a W and an M that were the Chinese character, but it read in English as woman, amazingly, that the other three letters carried it. And she put it in places where it said grand woman, or LA City woman, or bank woman. And she put those strips up all over Chinatown. I'm just not interested in telling people what to think or do. And that's the nature of my teaching. It's all how to use that initial attraction or even distaste for some place as the kernel from which to make a work. And I find that it works for my students at Yale as well as it worked for the women at the Women's Building.